Good morning, everyone. As has been said, I'm Eric Pearson, a director at CBRE, and it's a pleasure to be here to share one of the things we've been doing with Esri technology. I will start by saying, though, that compared to the dry run yesterday, seeing you all here and it not being an empty room is a lot more scary. To give you a sense of the scale of what we do, our brokerage teams use the system and data that I'll be talking about, DataViz, as part of doing their property deals, of which just one example is on the screen behind me. Last year, KKR and Mirastar, real estate investors, paid £100 million for 2 warehouses up near Warrington, advised by CBRE. Today I'm going to show you how we moved those brokerage teams from decentralized, unsearchable data into one geospatial platform in ArcGIS Enterprise, supporting multifunctional user base of nearly 250 people. I'll take you through the business challenges, the ArcGIS solution, and the adoption and visibility that the system has had. I'm going to start, though, with a brief introduction for CBRE, because I realise, although the size of the company is enormous, many of you may not have heard of us. CBRE stands for Coldwell Banker Richard Ellis, after key people since early parts of the company were founded in 1906. I'm not going to read through the numbers behind me. Rather, I'll explain first what's meant by commercial real estate. Broad terms, it's commercial real estate that's for business purposes rather than residential. Split often into offices, small dedicated offices through to large headquarters via co-working spaces. Retail, from individual stores and outlets through to entire shopping centres. Industrial, sometimes called industrial and logistics, and that's the sector that we've been mostly focusing on today. And then smaller categories such as hotels, healthcare, exhibition spaces, with lots of focus at the moment as well, data centres with the boom in AI. And what do we do? Well, pretty much anything related to properties. Leasing and sales of them, property and facilities design, management, build, advisory and valuation services, which is where I sit, and portfolio management and capital markets services like loan and mortgage brokerage. Just somewhat larger mortgages than you or I think, will probably ever contemplate. As part of doing all of that, CBRE has a breadth and depth of GIS talent across the UK and Europe, some of whom you can see appearing behind me where their offices are based, mostly where their offices are based. Salim, who's about to appear bottom left corner there, doesn't work on a yacht. He's in Riyadh, but I wanted to keep the map just to Europe. What I'm talking about today, though, wasn't built by the 40-plus people that we have. It was built by just 2 of us, Alyssa, who's sat in the front row, and myself. I'd like to start with the business challenges. To explain that, I'd like to introduce you to, well, I'd say a friend, but it's not quite true, an old enemy of mine, the XL mole, with whom I've played whack-a-mole over the years many, many times. And it just keeps popping up, generated by lots of individuals doing lots of separate things in lots of different offices. And of course, the problems that leads to, disparate and at sometimes desperate data. No central visibility or searchability, and definitely no standardization. Lots of emails asking, do you know about this? Or messages saying, have you got details on that? And like this pesky little mole, wherever he's got to, no way of seeing the data. No maps, no visualization, and no geo-interaction. And these are the problems that we set out to solve by creating a single solution for CBRE Industrial and Logistics in ArcGIS Enterprise. One central, searchable, geospatial version of the truth that saves time and effort for everyone. I bet none of you thought you'd be sitting there looking at a mole waving at you. So how did we solve those problems? Let me take you on our, to use a well-used word, journey. We start with Excel. And when we actually moved away from Excel to start with, we were using ArcGIS Enterprise 10.9.2. And although we built things in Enterprise Builder, Esri themselves admit it wasn't quite a mature technology at the time. So we were doing a bit in dashboards and a bit in web apps and trying to glue it all together with widgets not really talking to each other. And it worked, mostly. When we then upgraded to 11.1, we got the opportunity with the more mature Enterprise Builder to bring that all together, widgets talking to each other across pages, and also bringing in for us Arcade and Notebooks, which I'll both mention. And with the most recent upgrade to 11.4, we've pushed the visualisation into the web scenes and 3D. And you'll be able to see that at the end of the demo, which I'll move on to. Now, this is the cover screen of DataVis, or to give it its full name, the Industrial and Logistics Data Visualization Suite, version 2. I'm a big fan of helping people to help themselves, not least it cuts down on my email traffic and Alyssa's email traffic and so on. So the first thing that pops up is the splash screen with some hints and tips for a mostly non-technical user base. With that gone, we get the highlighted pages across the top. It's not a complex layout. And in case you were wondering, the picture in the background is of iPort Doncaster, just south of Doncaster, logistics development that's, when it's complete, will have about 6 million square foot of warehouse space. Now, moving into DataVis, the main slide itself. And across the top, we've got some key indicators. Number of buildings, total square footage, and how those are split by units that are built, under construction, or not even yet out the ground. And those are all driven by data views behind the scenes that I know will be mentioned in a few minutes' time. We also have a different cut of it, and acting as the key, the legend to the map, because you might notice there isn't one, it's actually the coloured boxes above it. Units that were built speculatively, so a developer just built it and thought, yeah, I'll be able to get somebody into it. Second hand, so there's been an occupier in it before, and build to suit, which is where it's being built for a particular occupier, a particular tenant, often to their specification. And on the very left-hand side, we've got the filters panel, absolutely key to how the brokers use this. And I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you're an online retailer who's outgrown their current facilities, so you're looking for a new one. What we can very swiftly do for you, and indeed for any logistics requirement, is to start finding that new operational home. Since you're an online retailer, it might be you'll be sending lots and lots of your volume out by parcel. So the first thing we're going to do is filter to the East and West Midlands, where we know there are lots and lots of main parcel hubs. We're also going to look for available sites. You don't want to wait for something to be built. You haven't got time. You've run out of space. For size, let's say 200 to 300,000 square foot. And in order for you to store lots of things vertically, we're going for a minimum of 10-metre eaves upwards. And as you can see, straight away from the nearly 8,000 sites that we've got in DataVis, we're down to 20, and of those, we'll be able to filter that down further when we start looking at the individual units. It's not just about the numbers and searching, though. We want people to have access to their own data. It's not an accident that my test site is located at the Port Ellen Whisky Distillery in Scotland. With that site selected, what I can do is press the export button and export that to CSV so that the brokers can go on and use that data in whatever they would like to. But CBRE, like many organisations, likes to control the data. And that's why behind the scenes, it's actually limited to just 25 records at a time to discourage people from doing many, many, many downloads and trying to walk off with the data. And that's controlled by some triggers behind the scenes that I know will be talked about in a few minutes as well, linking layers that aren't on the map anywhere but drive the export. One of the very core parts of data viz, though, is that users enter and maintain their own data. I don't, Alyssa doesn't. To enable this, about a quarter of those 250 users have contributor licenses, and they're responsible for the data. To add or edit sites, pop-out panel, which brings out the data form, the smart editor. Some fields are mandatory, some are optional, some are auto-populated, like you see the region there changing from Scotland to South East. That's based on arcade script running in the background. As I scroll to the bottom, you can see that we also allow for attachments. Mostly it's property brochures and pictures and so on, but in another non-accident, since this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, the attachment on here at the moment is about mental health support. Not just the main data, though, that the users maintain themselves. They also have access, or at least a select one or two have access, to a data maintenance page where they can go and maintain lists that then go into the domain-coded values behind the scenes that drive the drop-down lists in the data selection. Overnight, it's transferred across using Python in a scheduled notebook. It wasn't actually a requirement from the users. They didn't care about maintaining that part of the data. They were quite happy with us doing it, but it lightened the load on us a little bit, and it ticked my own technical challenge requirement in that even Esri's own documentation described the method and process for getting this to work as finicky. I'll finally turn to the newest part of data viz, the 3D mapping, and I'll take you on a bit of a tour, perhaps a typical tour that some of the goods will make on their way into the country to you. We start in London Gateway, one of the larger ports in the UK. And from there, we head up to Magna Park, Lutterworth in the Midlands, where there are a lot of national distribution centres, regional distribution centres, staging points, in the heart of the UK's logistics golden triangle. And finally, we then head on up to Warrington, the same logistics park that I mentioned at the start of the presentation, from where deliveries to that area might well be made, not least because one of the sheds up there, if you remember back, was for Amazon, so they're definitely using it for deliveries in the local area. Away from the system itself, we've been monitoring since the early days the activity that's gone into it. Now, no, we're not talking about the kind of activity levels that we'd see from Amazon or Google or many, many other players. Still an internal system, though, so we think that approaching 60,000 data layer views is pretty good. And the data growth has been astonishing too, going from an initial 902 buildings up to now very nearly 8,000, and the square footage has grown with that. From nearly 250 million square foot up to more than 622 million. Now, I'd like to close with two pieces of feedback that I received. I'm not going to read them both, but I am going to look at the second one, the one that I'm proudest of, because it's from Kieran Bird, our Divisional President, CEO, UK and Ireland. This market-leading tool is now widely used across the business and sets us apart from our competitors. It allows our team to make more informed decisions to better meet the needs of our clients by offering up-to-date information and helping us to offer the most innovative solutions. I thank Kieran, and above him, John, for that, and all of you for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing that fantastic example of data visualization in Experience Builder. Like CBRE, we want to create a dynamic application by delving into actions and filtering. So first, let me introduce the problem that I'm trying to solve. In my fictional scenario, I am an estate manager, and I'm responsible for managing several sites. As part of my environmental strategy, I want to improve the biodiversity on these sites. So to get started, I first need to understand exactly where my sites are located. Once I know the location, I also want to understand what the land cover is on these sites. I could either collect this data myself using surveys, or I could make use of some existing data sets in ArcGIS Online. Once I have this information, I can use it to understand what the current biodiversity is on my sites, and now I can start to look at potential areas for improvement. This can be broken down into 3 simple steps. Step 1 is to explore my data. Step 2 is to analyze my data. And finally, step 3 is to use this data to plan my biodiversity improvements. So to get started, we need to find the right data. So I'm going to open up the map viewer in ArcGIS Online. What I didn't mention earlier is that all of my sites are actually educational facilities. So the layer I've chosen to use is the OS OpenMap Local Functional Sites layer from the Living Atlas. If I click on this layer and go to the filter, you can see that I've filtered this by site theme, which is equal to education. Now I can see all of the educational sites within my area. However, I just want to look at the ones that I'm responsible for. So let's identify these now. So now I have my site locations. I want to look at land cover data. For this, I've used the OS NGD land data. This data is showing me what the physical and biological properties of the land in this area. If I move over to my legend, you can see that I've also customized some of the symbology for this layer, and I've split it up into the built and natural environment. This will help me categorize some of my biodiversity improvements later on. If I zoom in to one of my sites, you can see that I've clipped all of the OS data to my site boundaries. By doing this, I can look at site-specific biodiversity information. So now that my map's ready, let's have a look at making it an application. At my organization, we already use Web App Builder for a similar workflow. However, I want to start moving my users over to using Experience Builder. So to get started with a new experience in ArcGIS Online, I'm going to go to Create App, choose Experience Builder, and Create New. Once I'm here, I can start a new experience in a couple of different ways. The first way is to use one of the blank templates here and start to build up my layout from there. However, I already mentioned that my users are familiar with Web App Builder. So if we click on the Web App Builder Classic filter here, we can see a gallery of pre-configured Experience Builder templates. However, these layouts are similar to what you would see in the Web App Builder. By choosing one of these, I can ensure that the layout will be something that my users are already familiar with. Having a look at these different options here, the jewelry box template is very similar to my existing application. So this is the one that I'm going to choose. So now let's look at an application that I've already been working on. If you remember back to my 3 steps, the first step was exploring my data. And this is made easy with actions and filtering in Experience Builder. The first thing that I want my users to be able to do is to navigate between these different sites. You can see here on the left-hand side that I've added in a list widget, and I've used this to list out all of my different sites. If I go to the live view and start to click through these sites, you can see that some actions have been set up. There are two actions happening here. The first one is to zoom into the site that I've selected in the list. And the second is filtering the data framework for the land cover data and the site boundary data. To understand how this works, we need to know a bit more about actions, triggers, and targets. So to get started, let's move over to the action management pane over on the right-hand side. Now that I'm here, you can see we have two different types of actions: message actions and data actions. Message actions are customizable actions, and they have two different trigger types. Data actions, however, are pre-configured buttons that you can add to your widgets to enhance their functionality. These are then selected by the end user. If I go back to my message action, you can see that the trigger I've used here is the record selection changes. I've also used the two different action types within here, the zoom to and the filter data records, and that's what you were seeing as I clicked through the different list items. If I open up the filter data records, this will open my action settings. Within here, you can see that I've set up my trigger and action connection. For this example, I've used the site name field because this is present in both of those data sets. It's really, really important to understand your data so that you can plan these actions ahead of time. We can also add these actions to a range of widgets. If I go back to my list and click on this folder icon here, you can see that it's actually a button. If I go back to the live view and click the folder icon again, you can see that another action has been set up. And this time, it's opening the side panel at the bottom of the screen. This is an example of using actions to interact between different widgets. So now with my table set up, I can start looking at my data in a bit more detail. If I zoom in, I can also see that there's another action. The action here is filtering the ground truthing survey results, and you can see these by the markers on the map. We know that it's being filtered because all of the survey sites that I'm looking at are from site A, which is the site that I have up on the map. With new functionalities in Experience Builder, I can now also see the attachments of my survey directly in the table widget. If I click on a record and go to the actions here, I can also do a range of different actions, including the new show pop-up, which shows the pop-up on the map. This is an example of the data actions that I mentioned earlier. So now that we've explored our data, let's hand over to Molly, who's going to look at further extending the capabilities of our data in Experience Builder.
So as Sam has shown, Experience Builder has allowed us to create a really simple application to start understanding or exploring the land cover data we have for our sites. And we've built some actions in here to make that even easier. I'm going to build on this now to work through those analyze and planning workflows, adding in even more actions to help us do the job. So if I jump into the Analyze tab, the first thing I'm noticing is that I've been immediately zoomed out to a place some of you may recognize as Exeter. And if I'm an ecologist sitting at my desk trying to follow through workflows, it's not very ideal to have just lost the site I was working on. And it'll probably start to get quite frustrating quite quickly. The good news is that there's a really simple fix for this with the actions in Experience Builder. So if I jump into the configuration, I want to set up an action on the map widget in my Explore tab. My trigger here is going to be extent changes in this map, and I'll target them at my map in my Analyse tab. I'm going to use Pan to and also Zoom to. And this should mean that once I move to a different site and then go over to my Analyse tab, the extent and scale will be preserved, so no more getting lost or frustrated. And now I know where I'm working, I can start to make use of these analysis widgets over on the left-hand side. But to make these interactive, I'll need to make use of some data framework views. By default, all of the widgets in your experience builders will use one data framework, which means that if you apply an action to filter down the data, it will filter down all of the widgets. And in this case, that's not really something I want to happen, as I'd like to be able to interact with and filter down my pie chart without impacting my overview statistics at the bottom. So if I move into the Data tab of my Experience Builder and navigate through my web map layers to that OSNGD land layer, you can see that I've got 4 different data views already configured. The first 3 are filtering my land data down by site. And I can look and see that these are linked to my different text widgets. And that's what's allowing me to pull out the different percentage land cover types per site, even though my data framework contains all 3 in the same data layer. My land cover by area data view is what's powering my widget, my pie chart widget. And that will be what allows me to filter down just that data view rather than the whole data framework. So Sam's already shown us the power of using filtering actions in Experience Builder, and I've configured the same thing on my pie chart, so the same trigger, target, and action. But it looks a bit different with the pie chart. Instead of clicking on a button to open up a table and filter down that data, I'm instead able to select a segment of my pie chart, and that will filter down the data on my map. These filters are also preserved in my data actions, so I can calculate statistics or export that data just for the filtered down pie chart segment. But I'd like to take this one step further and filter down my land cover pie chart based on the site I'm looking at, so that when I move to site C, I don't want to see all of my land cover statistics, just the ones for site C. And that's where those data framework views really come in handy. So like before, my trigger for this action will be extent changes in my map. But this time, instead of filtering down a specific widget, I'll use my data framework. And if I find that OSNGD land layer, you can see that I have the choice of which data framework view to use. So I'll swap over to my land cover pie chart view rather than the default. And if I keep in query by current extent, you should now see that as I move across to site B, that pie chart will update to show me the land cover just for site B. But it won't impact those key overview statistics I've got at the bottom, which means that even though I'm looking at site B and I can see all of site B in my pie chart, I can still tell that site A has the most natural land cover available for planning. So that's probably the best place to start. Over in my Plan tab, I've used some of the filter widgets, and those work against my survey results that Sam collected earlier. And they're really useful for me to say, I'm going to digitize some tree planting improvements, so I'll only look at where we want to plant trees. And if triggers, targets, and actions all seem like a bit too much to remember, the good news is that the filter widget in Experience Builder works intuitively, so you don't need to configure the filter or within the Actions tab. But you can still extend it with some panning and zooming actions if you want to. I've already started to plan a bit of a biodiversity improvement plan based on those suggestions from Sam. But I can see that this point here I'm yet to make a plan for. So having a look at what Sam sent over from the field, I can see that this area we should probably plant some trees. And just checking the photo Sam's attached, there's already some trees in this area, and it looks like a place that a tree could grow. So I'll take that suggestion and digitize it onto my map. And this is using the Edit widget from Experience Builder. So I've already auto-populated some of those characteristics for this data, and I'm happy that it looks right to me, so I'll add it to my plan. I'm now going to make use of the Print widget in Experience Builder, so that Sam and I can export a layout to look at later. Experience Builder allows you to bring in custom print templates that are configured within your ArcGIS Online organization. And that means that I can ensure that the information I want to include in my biodiversity improvement plan is there and it's always consistent, which means that when I send this back to Sam, we can check we're both on the same page.
Excellent. Thanks, Molly. So now let's summarize some of the things that we've been looking at today. So we've shown you how dynamic interactions can be used in your data and your widgets. Plus, we've demonstrated how this can be applied in our fictional scenario. So now let's have a quick recap of the structure of these dynamic interactions. If you can remember, this is made up of 3 components: triggers, targets, and actions. Triggers are the events generated by the source widget, and we have 2 types of these. Our targets respond to the trigger and perform the actions. These can be set on the widgets or the data framework. And finally, we have our actions. These are provided by the targets to perform a specific logic or function. Molly, perhaps you can help us explain this a little bit further.
So as you've seen today, there are 2 different types of actions available in Experience Builder. Message actions perform an action in response to a trigger, and you need to configure them in the Actions tab with a trigger, a target, and an action. Data actions, on the other hand, look like an in-widget button, which performs specific actions when selected by a user. You can choose which data actions are available across different widgets in the Actions tab, but you don't need to configure a trigger, target, or action, since it's your users that are acting as the trigger. It's also worth keeping in mind the different ways to filter in Experience Builder. If you'd like to filter the data that's going into a widget, then you can use a data framework view. Whereas if you'd like to use an action to filter your data, it's better to use a data action. So it's worth keeping in mind which one works for what you want to achieve.
Excellent. So now we know all about dynamic interactions and how to set them up. So let Molly and I share our top 3 tips for you to get started with these in Experience Builder. Top tip number 1 is to understand your data and plan your actions ahead of time. This is important so that you don't overcomplicate your application, as this can introduce lag and it will slow down the application for your end users.
Tip 2 is to select the right widget when configuring actions. You need to think about where it is that your trigger is happening, or what change you're making in the application to cause the action to happen. So it might be that you want to filter down a pie chart widget for your action, but if extent changes in your map is the trigger for that, then you need to be configuring the action in the map widget.
And finally, tip number 3. Have a think about whether you want to use the data framework versus using the data views. Using the data framework as your target affects all of the widgets that use that data. If that isn't what you want, consider using the widget-only actions, or you can set up a data view, like Molly showed you earlier, to isolate the data that you want for that action. Thank you so much for listening, and if you have any questions at all, please feel free to come and find us throughout the day.